Most universities think that they have a brand that resonates much further than it actually does. I've had many conversations over the years, and actually some pretty heated ones, even with leadership at certain schools that believe their radius of where their brand resonated went a lot further than it did. But the beauty is, I love data, and we always found a way to kind of showcase what the data was actually showing as far as brand resonance, how far the brand perception and actual awareness reached, and why certain times our campaigns cost more outside of certain radiuses. Hi, Rustam Irani, back with another episode of ROI University, where today I want to talk about what I call a weak signal. Basically, a brand heat map of looking at how far out your brand resonates with your audience or with your potential student base and population. We've done this study a couple times, and there are definitely some things that stand out for sure. Some of the key takeaways that we've learned over the years: 67% of undergraduates enroll within driving distance of their home. So when you think about that, that's, over 2/3 of students are looking within a driving distance radius of where they currently live. We also have looked at how to identify your strongest geographic enrollment zones over the years. We've looked at why local trust matters. And then we've also looked at why some universities have taken the time to market and investments to market outside of their, what I call their kind of zone. And so, we look at dozens and dozens of schools, data within those schools, and we've basically found some interesting things. I've kind of labeled it out as a couple different concentric circles. The inner circle is basically what I see as like basically 0 to 25 miles or so. There are students that will drive 25 miles. That's not too bad. Now, if you're in Miami, that might be a stretch, right? If you're in LA, not happening. But there's definitely areas where that 0 to 25 miles kind of makes sense. I believe from what we've seen in our data and in working with dozens of universities, again, we've seen that 0 to 25 miles be what we call the power zone. That's really where your brand, regardless of how much you're investing, typically the community has awareness. Again, it all depends on what schools we're talking about. Harvard is going to be quite different than a smaller school like Florida International University. So there are definitely going to be big differences there. So that's just something to keep in mind. Again, the data tells all. And one of the things that we talk about when we do work with school clients, how to maximize that, what I call that power zone. Local events, local community gatherings, local alumni, career fairs, sports tournaments. Those are all things that can be done in the local community that can really make impacts. High school partnerships, those are always awesome. And really, what other community stories do you have for local impacts? Are your alumni on the local news? Are they talking about great things that they're doing in the community? That's the power zone, and those are areas where you could definitely take advantage of that. The next ring or concentric circle outside of that is what we call the middle ring. And that's really where your brand recognition starts to deteriorate a little bit. That's usually between 25 to 100 miles. Now, there's a few things for that. What you need to consider is how many other schools are in that zone, how many other options do they have, how big of a brand and how much history do you have as a school. Like, those are all factors that play in. Some of it is, where you can really track it based on, what you're seeing in market demand. You can see that in even Google search demand. There's so many different ways to kind of really determine that. But That's typically an area in that zone where you will start to see some fading of your brand. Again, it depends on the school, but for yours, it might be a little different. There are schools, some of the smaller schools, where it might be 0 to 5, 5 to 15, 15 to 40. Like those might be the zones where it starts to fade out, right? I think in this next zone, though, one thing that we have seen has been a really big factor and area of focus is program specific marketing. Now, a lot of time when you have a brand that may not be as strong, you want to look at what your other key differentiators are or what your other key product offerings are that are maybe unique to the market, unique to that area where those students are. Showcasing your facilities, emphasizing kind of career outcomes in those areas. So, if you have a unique program, promote it. And one example of this is, we were working on a project with University of Alaska, and they have a unique marine program that's really specific to the region. And they did an amazing job of promoting it within that region. Now, the other caveat of that, and the interesting thing is they wanted to take it national. And this goes back to this whole conversation. We've had these types of conversations where this program is killing it. We're doing great. We're in Alaska. We have a marine program, but we want to take it national. It should work. People should recognize that University of Alaska is an incredible brand and so on. And fortunately for University of Alaska, there is a bit of a tie to marine, to wildlife, to outdoors. So that kind of resonated when we did some of that additional study and research there. But that's just an example of like one of the different schools that can potentially compete at a little bit further away radius or distance from the actual main core brand campus. Some of the competitive advantages they might offer and you might be able to offer at some of those kind of outer bands is, just promoting maybe you have lower costs compared to urban universities that may be in the cities. You might have special research opportunities for students that may be outside, based on local pharmacies, local companies, other types of things, and partnerships. There's really great opportunity to start to partner with other types of companies. So, for example, there's some school in Florida, and there's a ton of schools in Florida at the traditional kind of level, which, University of Central Florida, University of Florida, Florida State, all of these different schools, Florida Tech. And so, what can you do from a partnership perspective based on where you're at to really build the community and the opportunities? So NASA is on the East Coast. It's near Embry-Riddle. It's near Florida Tech. It's somewhat near University of Central Florida, although that's still 30, 40 miles out. So what can you be doing there on a partnership perspective, right? Then the last band, what I call is the outer ring. And so, that's where you start to really get away from any level of brand awareness. And we did do a little bit of a study. And if you're interested, let me know. And I can get you this study that we did that looks at ROI of enrollment conversion by distance for campus and really start to get to like under 20, 10% once you get to outside of 100 miles from campus. Again, every school is unique, every school is different, but you really start to fall off after that, like 25 miles. 50 miles drops another probably half, of the level of interest, and then you really start to fall off between 100 and 200 miles. I specifically remember one conversation with a university dean, and he was absolutely convinced that they were a lot of people believe they are the Harvard of their area, right? And he just couldn't understand when we were telling him that when we were going out a bit further from where the core university was, we were competing against some pretty big brands and they weren't aware of this university. And he just could not grasp that because he believed that they were the Harvard of their area and they had the reach nationally. There was nobody in the nation that did not know about them. They are a top probably 70 institution according to a lot of lists, but still, I had never heard of them, which was kind of crazy. So, anyways, you just really gotta understand and not be biased in these conversations. You've got to be able to be open minded and realize that, like, the data can tell you a little bit more than you think you know about your brand and your brand resonance across the nation. Um, so, in this area, like, nationally ranked programs do well. That's a big determining factor. Unique specializations, maybe there's scholarships, there's other things that are available to students outside of that brand or maybe even outside of that state. And so those are areas where you really want to focus in on the clear picture of what you would offer somebody who would have to travel, who would have to come live in the dorms, or who would have to move potentially for this type of opportunity. So, when you look at it as a whole, it's important to kind of keep in mind that it really depends where you sit in this whole really what we call like the brand kind of signal zone. And usually, typically, depending on the size, 0 to 10 miles, 10 to 50, 100 to 200 plus, those are kind of where your signals are the strongest in those early ones, and then it starts to fade. And so I'm not sure if you've ever done this type of data analysis or study, but I would highly recommend it. Take a look. You can get this from even some Google Analytics data. You can get it from your own internal CRM data and see potentially app rates percentages, enrollment rate percentages based on these radiuses. You can also see cost per clicks based on these radiuses. There's so many different ways to kind of determine this. And there probably is a couple of those that make sense on your end. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more or you want to do this type of study, that's something that we could help with. But either way, I think this is something that's very important. It's going to continue to be important, especially as a lot more questions are answered through the LLMs, and people are going to be finding out from you and a lot of what makes you unique in the marketplace, in your area, in your community, and even nationally. So that's all for this class of ROI University. Hopefully you got a little bit of there. If you want some additional, I wrote also a newsletter post on this if you want to get a little more insights into kind of how we built some of this stuff out. So thanks so much for joining us this week. And at ROI University, the big ROI is personal.